Some women are swept off their feet by men in tailored suits. I was claimed by one whose eyes held winter and whose empire was built on secrets that could bury us both. The rain came down in sheets that Monday night, turning the windows of my third-floor apartment into rivers of distorted city lights. Each drop that found its way through the loose seal landed on my second-hand desk with a rhythm that had become white noise. The percussion of a life lived in the margins. I'd learned to work through it, through everything, because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant drowning. I climbed the last few stairs with my laptop bag cutting into my shoulder, 23 years old and feeling 50. While other cybersecurity students were at bars or gaming tournaments, I was finishing my fourth consecutive 16-hour day. 6 hours of classes, 10 hours freelancing for clients who paid in installments and excuses. The rent was overdue. Again, the notice from the building manager sat on my kitchen counter, and my brother's promises had become as reliable as smoke. "Caleb," I called, shouldering through the door that never quite latched properly. "Please tell me you called back that firm about the junior developer position." My brother sat hunched in the blue glow of multiple monitors, 25 years old, with the posture of someone trying to disappear into himself. Empty energy drink cans created a fortress around his gaming chair, and his dark hair stuck up at angles that suggested he hadn't moved in hours, maybe days. "Diane, hey, you're back early." "It's past midnight, Caleb. That's not early, that's tomorrow." I dropped my bag and surveyed the disaster that had metastasized in my absence. Cables everywhere. His crypto trading dashboards glowing with numbers that meant nothing except loss. The building manager stopped me again. "Mrs. Chen actually teared up when she told me they're considering eviction proceedings." His laugh came out wrong. Too high, too sharp. Eviction. Jesus. Such a civilized word for throwing people into the street. Then do something about it. The words erupted before I could cage them. Apply to actual jobs. Show up to interviews instead of chasing digital coins that don't exist. Stop gambling away money we don't have on platforms I know you're not supposed to be accessing. For the first time all evening, he turned to look at me directly. His eyes, the same dark brown as mine, the same eyes as our mother's, were bloodshot and haunted. "You think it's that simple, Diane? You think I haven't tried? Have you?" I moved to the kitchenette, began the familiar ritual of cleaning up after him. Dishes in the sink, ash from joints he shouldn't be smoking, the archaeology of a person who'd stopped caring about the basic mechanics of survival. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've given up completely." "I used to be good at this," he whispered, more to his monitors than to me. "Really good. Top 10% in my graduating class. Companies wanted me. I had offers. I'd heard this requiem before. The golden era, when Caleb Garrett was a prodigy programmer, when our mother was still alive to see it, when we lived in a real house instead of this apartment that smelled like other people's failures had seeped into the walls. That was before Mom died, Caleb. That was 4 years ago. At some point you have to move forward. Some things you can't move forward from, Di. Some debts." He trailed off, his fingers frozen above his keyboard. "Some debts follow you everywhere." The way he said it made me pause, a coffee mug halfway to the sink. "What debts? What are you talking about?" But he'd already turned back to his screens, retreating into whatever digital labyrinth he'd been building to avoid this exact conversation. I finished cleaning in the silence that felt heavier than it should, my mind cataloging possibilities I didn't want to examine. Caleb had always been dramatic when he was stressed, prone to cryptic statements that dissolved under daylight. This was probably nothing. Probably. At exactly 12:17 a.m., someone began pounding on our door. Not knocking. Pounding with the kind of methodical force that suggested the person on the other side didn't care about disturbing neighbors, didn't care about noise ordinances, didn't care about anything, except making their presence absolutely undeniable. Each impact reverberated through our thin walls like a heartbeat, steady and inevitable. Caleb went rigid. The color drained from his face so completely I thought he might pass out. His hand jerked, sending an empty can clattering to the floor, the sound absurdly loud in the sudden suffocating silence between knocks. "Di, don't." His voice came out strangled. Don't answer it, please. Whatever happens, do not open that door. But before I could respond, before I could process the animal terror in his eyes, the pounding stopped, replaced by something worse, the precise, mechanical sound of metal working against metal. Someone was picking our lock with professional efficiency, the kind of skill that suggested this wasn't their first time bypassing a barrier that was supposed to keep the world out. The door swung open. 3 men stood in the hallway, water streaming from their expensive overcoats despite the covered corridor. They moved into our apartment with the fluid coordination of sharks who'd found blood in the water, their eyes scanning our pathetic living space with the kind of assessment that missed nothing and judged everything. The first man through the threshold was massive, 6'4" of solid muscle, barely contained by a suit that probably cost more than our monthly rent. His hands looked capable of crushing bone, and the flat affect in his eyes suggested he'd done exactly that more than once. The second was leaner but no less dangerous, with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow and the coiled readiness of a weapon waiting to discharge. But it was the third man who stopped my breath and froze my blood in the same instant. He was younger than I'd expected. Maybe 30, 32 at most, with the kind of devastating beauty that belonged in Renaissance paintings, not standing in my crumbling apartment dripping rain onto our stained linoleum. Dark hair swept back from a face composed of sharp angles and cold symmetry. His suit was charcoal perfection, tailored with the kind of precision that spoke of artisans and appointments, not department stores. Everything about him was controlled, curated, expensive. But his eyes were pale blue, almost colorless, and they held the kind of glacial intelligence that evaluated, calculated, and decided your worth in the space between heartbeats. When they settled on me, I felt like prey being studied by something that had climbed to the apex of every food chain and found the view boring. Caleb Garrett. His voice was quiet, controlled, wrapped around an accent I couldn't quite place. Italian, maybe, but buffed smooth by international schools and boardrooms. You've been avoiding my messages. My brother struggled to his feet, swaying like a man standing on the deck of a sinking ship. Mr. Colombo, I didn't expect. When someone owes me $3 million and then disappears, the man, Colombo, interrupted with surgical precision. I take a personal interest in the matter. $3 million. The number hit me like a physical blow, so impossibly large my brain initially rejected it as a mistake, a misunderstanding, a cruel joke. My brother, who couldn't scrape together rent money, who subsisted on ramen and energy drinks, somehow owed this dangerous stranger more money than most people earned in a lifetime. I can explain, Caleb began, but his voice had no strength behind it. Colombo held up a single finger. Not aggressive, just absolute. The gesture of someone so accustomed to obedience that he didn't need to raise his voice. Your explanations have been notably absent for the past 6 months, Caleb. As have your payments. As has, in fact, any indication that you take your obligations seriously. Those pale eyes shifted to me, and I felt my skin prickle with the awareness I couldn't name. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Your sister. She wasn't mentioned in our original documentation. Leave her out of this, Caleb said, finding some fragment of spine despite his obvious terror. Diane has nothing to do with my business. She doesn't even know. Your business became my business the moment you defaulted on our agreement. Colombo stepped closer to me, and I caught the scent of expensive cologne layered over something darker. Rain, maybe, or the kind of cold that lived in deep water. Diane Garrett, 23 years old, cybersecurity major at Metropolitan Technical University, graduating top 5%. Freelances for mid-tier corporate clients. Works out of this apartment because office space is an unnecessary expense. The fact that he knew so much, the precision of details no one should have, made my mouth go dry. How do you... I make it my practice to know everything about people who owe me money, Miss Garrett, and their families. His gaze moved through our apartment like a surgical instrument, cataloging the broken furniture, the water stains blooming on the ceiling, the general atmosphere of barely managed collapse. Though I must say, seeing your living conditions makes it clear that your brother's debt is unlikely to be resolved through conventional means. What kind of debt? I found my voice. though it came out smaller than I wanted, more afraid than I'd ever admit. How does someone owe $3 million? Caleb made a strangled sound, but Columbo's slight smile silenced him. Cryptocurrency speculation, Miss Garrett. Your brother has been using my organization's money to trade digital assets. For the past 3 years, he's been borrowing to cover his losses, always convinced that the next transaction would be the one to make everything right. He paused, let the timeline sink in. 3 years. While you've been working yourself to exhaustion, your brother has been systematically destroying any chance at stability you might have had. The room tilted. 3 years. The entire time I'd been killing myself. Double shifts, all-nighters, every freelance contract I could scrape together. Caleb had been gambling away millions of someone else's money. I can get it. The words left my mouth before my brain could stop them. Give me time. I'll figure something out. $3 million, Miss Garrett. Columbo's tone remained conversational, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. At your current income rate, you would need approximately 47 years to earn that sum. Assuming, of course, that you never spend a single dollar on trivialities like food, shelter, or continuing to breathe. Then what do you want? The question emerged as barely a whisper. Columbo studied me for a long moment, and I had the disturbing sensation that he was seeing something I didn't understand, reading a pattern I couldn't perceive, calculating an equation where I was somehow a variable that mattered. Your brother has 72 hours to present me with $3 million, Miss Garrett. If he cannot produce the funds, he let the sentence hang, delicate and sharp. Then I'll be forced to collect payment through alternative means. I assure you, the alternatives are far less pleasant for everyone involved. He turned toward the door, his men falling into formation with practiced synchronization. But at the threshold, he paused, glancing back over his shoulder, with an expression I couldn't read. Curiosity, maybe, or assessment, or something else entirely. 72 hours, Caleb. Don't make me come looking for you again. The door closed with a soft click that carried more menace than if they'd slammed it hard enough to shake the building's foundation. I stood frozen in the center of our destroyed living room, trying to process what had just happened. $3 million, 72 hours. And a man with winter eyes who'd looked at me like I was the answer to a question I didn't understand but was terrified to learn. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're ready for another captivating story, go ahead and click subscribe, like this video, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from. I love knowing how far our stories travel and how many hearts they reach. Your support helps us bring even more thrilling tales your way. And trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Now, settle in. Let's begin the story. The 72 hours dissolved like sugar in acid. Caleb disappeared the morning after Columbo's visit, leaving nothing but an unmade bed and a note scrawled on the back of a takeout receipt. I'm sorry. I'll fix this. Don't look for me. I looked anyway. Called every number I had for him, checked every dive bar and internet cafe where he used to hide. Nothing. He'd learned how to vanish from the best, from a man who dealt in digital smoke and mirrors. On the third night, I sat alone in our apartment, watching the clock tick toward midnight like a countdown to detonation. The rain had returned, hammering against the windows with the same relentless rhythm it had 3 nights ago. I'd stopped sleeping, stopped eating, just sat there with my laptop open, researching Marcello Colombo and finding nothing but ghosts, shell corporations, legitimate businesses, philanthropic donations. A man who existed in public records as a technology investor and art collector. The internet knew nothing about the man with winter eyes who'd stood in my apartment and spoken about debt collection like other people discussed the weather. The knock came at 11:47 p.m. Soft this time. Almost polite. I opened the door already knowing who I'd find. Columbo stood alone in the hallway, still immaculate despite the storm. A different suit, navy this time, with a silk tie the color of old blood. Water beaded on his shoulders but didn't seem to touch him, as if even the rain knew better than to overstep. Miss Garrett. His voice was quiet, almost gentle. May I come in? I stepped aside because refusing felt like trying to stop a glacier with my bare hands. He moved through my apartment with the same assessing gaze as before, but this time something in his expression had shifted. Not softer exactly, more certain. Like he'd made a decision and was now simply following through with the inevitable. "Your brother didn't return," he said. "It wasn't a question." "No. And you have no way of contacting him?" "None that work." He nodded slowly, as if confirming something he already knew. "Then we have a problem, Miss Garrett. Because debts don't disappear simply because the debtor does. They transfer. They metastasize." He turned to face me fully, and those pale eyes held something I couldn't decipher. "Your brother's debt is now your debt. That's not how debt works. In your world, perhaps not. In mine?" The slight curve of his mouth held no warmth. "In mine, blood answers for blood. Family for family. Then kill me." The words came out steadier than I expected. "Because I can't give you $3 million. You know I can't. So if that's the only resolution here, let's not draw it out." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe. Or respect. "I don't want to kill you, Diane." The way he said my name made my skin prickle. Familiar. Possessive. "Then what do you want?" He was quiet for a long moment, studying me with an intensity that felt like being read at a molecular level. "I want you to come with me." "Where?" "Somewhere you can be useful. Somewhere your particular skills have value." He moved closer, and I forced myself not to step back. "You're a cybersecurity specialist, Miss Garrett. You understand systems, networks, the architecture of protection and intrusion. I have use for those skills. You want me to work for you. I want you to work for me exclusively. In exchange, your brother's debt is forgiven. He lives. You live." And everyone continues to draw breath. His gaze never wavered. "The alternative is less appealing for everyone involved. This is kidnapping. This is a business transaction." He pulled something from his inner jacket pocket. A phone, sleek and new. "You have 15 minutes to pack whatever matters to you. One bag, then we leave." "And if I refuse?" The silence that followed carried more menace than any threat could have. "Finally," he said softly, "then I find your brother. And when I do, I won't be offering him employment." My hands were shaking. I hid them behind my back, refusing to let him see the fear that was crawling up my spine like ice water. "How do I know you won't kill him anyway?" "You don't. Honest, at least. But I keep my word, Miss Garrett. Always. It's the only currency that matters in my world. If you come with me willingly, work for me faithfully, your brother remains untouched. You have my word, the word of a criminal." His smile was brief and cold. "The word of a man who has built an empire on the foundation of kept promises." 14 minutes now. I looked around the apartment, at the water-stained walls, the second-hand furniture, the monitors still glowing with Caleb's abandoned trading platforms. 4 years I'd spent trying to hold this place together. 4 years of bleeding myself dry to keep us afloat. And my brother had spent that same time digging our grave deeper. "If I do this," I said slowly, "I want proof he's alive. Regular proof. Done. And I want your word that you won't hurt him as long as I'm cooperating. You have it. And I want—" My voice cracked. I swallowed hard. "I want to know what I'm actually agreeing to." "What kind of work?" Columbo stepped closer. Close enough that I could see the faint scar bisecting his left eyebrow. Evidence of violence survived. The kind that requires discretion, intelligence, and absolute loyalty. Nothing that will compromise whatever moral framework you're clinging to. "I don't need you to hurt people, Diane. I need you to protect my interests." "Protect them from what?" "From people who want to see me destroyed? Simple. Direct. 12 minutes. I packed in 10. Clothes, laptop, external drives, a photograph of my mother that was the only thing in the apartment worth saving. When I emerged with my duffel bag, Columbo was standing by the window, looking out at the rain-soaked city below. "Ready?" he asked without turning. "No." "Good. People who are ready for this life usually don't survive it long." He moved toward the door, then paused. "One more thing, Miss Garrett. From this moment forward, you don't exist in your old life. No contact with friends, No social media, no digital footprints that lead back to Diane Garrett. You're a ghost now. Do you understand? I understood I was disappearing into a world I'd only read about in crime reports and conspiracy theories. I understood that the door I was walking through didn't open from the other side. I understand. Then let's go. The car waiting downstairs was black and expensive, all tinted windows and whisper-quiet engine. The same two men from before sat in front, the massive one driving, the scarred one riding passenger. Columbo held the rear door open, and I slid inside, my duffel bag clutched to my chest like a shield. The drive took 40 minutes through rain that never stopped falling. We left the city proper, winding through increasingly isolated roads until the buildings disappeared entirely, replaced by dense forest that pressed against both sides of the narrow lane. No streetlights out here, just darkness and the rhythmic sweep of windshield wipers. When we finally stopped, I couldn't see anything through the rain-blurred windows. Columbo opened my door, and I stepped out into a world transformed. The mansion rose from the darkness like something carved from shadow and ambition. 3 stories of stone and glass, all sharp angles and impossible architecture, lit from within by golden light that made it look like a paper lantern floating in the void. Gardens stretched in every direction, manicured, perfect, dotted with stone fountains and classical statuary that gleamed wet in the security lighting. And everywhere, figures moved with fluid precision. Guards, I realized, dozens of them, positioned at carefully calculated intervals, their dark suits rendering them nearly invisible against the night. "Welcome," Columbo said quietly beside me, "to your new home." The entrance was guarded by 2 more men who nodded at Columbo but watched me with the flat assessment of people evaluating a potential threat. The doors opened into a foyer that belonged in a European palace. Marble floors polished to mirror brightness, a chandelier dripping with crystal that cast fractured light across walls hung with art I dimly recognized from textbooks. A Caravaggio, maybe, or a very expensive forgery. Everything gleamed. Gold fixtures, polished wood, candlelight flickering in wall sconces despite the presence of modern lighting. It was beautiful the way a knife was beautiful. All sharp edges and lethal elegance. This way. Columbo moved through the space, like he designed it himself, his footsteps echoing in the vast silence. I followed because refusing would only delay the inevitable. He led me through corridors that seemed to stretch forever, each one lined with closed doors and more artwork, more evidence of wealth so profound it had stopped being about money and become about power. The kind of power that could make people disappear. The kind I was now entirely at the mercy of. We stopped at a door carved from dark wood, intricate patterns worked into its surface. Columbo pushed it open, and I stepped into a room that stole what remained of my courage. It was a study, but calling it that felt inadequate. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined with leather-bound volumes that looked centuries old. A desk positioned before windows that would, in daylight, probably offer views of the gardens and forest beyond. But it was the atmosphere that hit hardest. The sense that this room was where decisions were made that echoed across continents, where power lived and breathed and decided who got to do the same. "Sit." Columbo gestured to a chair before the desk. Not the throne-like seat behind it, but a smaller one positioned where petitioners would make their case. I sat. He moved behind the desk, retrieved something from a drawer, then returned to stand before me. A document, several pages thick, bound in leather. He set it on the small table beside my chair. "A contract," he said, "outlining your responsibilities, your compensation, and the terms of your service." Service. The word tasted like ash. "You mean captivity?" "I mean employment." His tone remained level, almost bored. "You'll manage my digital security infrastructure, monitor for intrusions, maintain firewalls, ensure the integrity of communications networks. You'll also assist with analysis of encrypted data when needed. So I'm protecting your criminal empire. You're protecting my business interests. What you choose to call them is irrelevant." He pulled a pen from his jacket, set it beside the contract. "You'll be compensated at a rate that exceeds anything you would have earned in your previous life. You'll have access to resources beyond what any legitimate employer could provide. And in return, you'll offer your complete loyalty and discretion. And my brother? Lives, as long as you uphold your end of this agreement." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice had dropped to something almost intimate. "I meant what I said, Diane. I keep my promises. But I also keep score. Betray me, and your brother dies badly. Serve me faithfully, and he remains untouched. It's a simple equation. Simple. Nothing about this was simple. I picked up the pen, my hand steady despite the screaming in my head that this was wrong, this was surrender, this was selling myself to save someone who might not deserve saving. But Caleb was blood, the only family I had left. And maybe that made me weak, or maybe it just made me human. The contract was detailed, professional, almost mundane in its specificity. Hours, duties, expectations. A salary that made my eyes water. Living arrangements, benefits, termination clauses that made my stomach turn because they dealt in years, not months. This wasn't temporary. This was permanent. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "How long what? How long am I bound to this?" Columbo's silence stretched until I looked up at him. His expression was unreadable, but something in those winter eyes had shifted. "Until I release you, or until you're no longer useful. And what happens when I'm no longer useful? That depends entirely on how you conduct yourself until that moment." He leaned against the edge of the desk, close enough that I could smell his cologne. Something expensive and understated that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. "I'm not a monster, Diane. I don't kill for pleasure. But I do what's necessary to protect what's mine. And as of this moment, you're mine." The possessiveness in his voice made something twist in my chest. Fear and something else I refused to name. "Sign," he said softly. "Your brother lives, and your silence becomes mine." I signed. My handwriting looked small and fragile on the expensive paper, my name barely legible through the shake in my hand. When I set the pen down, Columbo took the contract, studied my signature for a moment, then looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. "Welcome to my world, Diane." The candlelight caught the planes of his face, turning him into something between angel and demon, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. And I realized with dawning horror that this wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. The days blurred like watercolors in rain. Morning became afternoon became night, without markers or meaning. I moved through the mansion like a ghost, learning its rhythms the way prisoners learn the patterns of their guards. My room was on the 3rd floor, at the end of a corridor lined with closed doors I was never invited to open. It was beautiful in an impersonal way. King-sized bed with sheets that felt like water, furniture that belonged in design magazines, windows that overlooked gardens that looked painted on. Everything perfect. Everything hollow. Columbo. I couldn't think of him as Marcello. Not yet, maybe not ever. Gave me work with the efficiency of a general deploying troops. Files that needed organizing, ledgers that needed analysis, communication logs that needed monitoring. Nothing explicitly illegal, but everything wrapped in layers of obfuscation that told me exactly what kind of business I was protecting. He dealt in information. That much became clear quickly. Names, locations, financial records, surveillance data. The currency of the modern underworld wasn't drugs or weapons. It was knowledge, and I was being taught to guard it. We rarely spoke directly. He would leave instructions on the desk in the study where I worked, handwritten notes in elegant script that felt strangely intimate for their precision. Sometimes he would appear in the doorway, silent as smoke, watching me work with an intensity that made my skin prickle. Then he'd leave without a word, and I'd spend the next hour wondering what he'd been looking for. On the 4th day, I noticed the locked drawer in his desk. I was alone in the study, a rare gift of privacy. When I saw it, mahogany with a brass keyhole, positioned in the bottom right corner of the massive desk. Every other drawer opened smoothly when I tested them, filled with pens and paper and the mundane detritus of administration. But that one remained sealed. I tried not to think about it. Failed spectacularly. By the 7th day, I'd memorized the guards' rotation patterns. The times when the corridor outside the study was empty, the blind spots in the security camera coverage, not consciously planning anything, just observing, cataloging, the way I'd been trained to do. Columbo found me in the library on the 8th night. I'd taken to wandering after finishing my assigned work, exploring the parts of the mansion I was allowed to access. The library was vast. 3 walls of books floor to ceiling, rolling ladders on brass tracks, and a fireplace large enough to walk into. I was standing before a section on Renaissance art when I felt him arrive. I didn't hear him, didn't see him enter, just suddenly knew I wasn't alone anymore. "You don't scare easily." His voice came from somewhere behind me, quiet enough that I had to strain to hear it. I turned slowly, found him standing in the doorway, still in his suit despite the late hour. He'd loosened his tie, unbuttoned his collar. It was the most undone I'd ever seen him, and somehow that made him more dangerous, not less. "You don't either," I replied, matching his volume. His mouth curved slightly. Not quite a smile. "What makes you say that?" Most people would be afraid to leave someone with my skills alone with their data systems. All it would take is one message to the right authorities, one upload to the right server, and your entire empire could collapse. And yet you haven't done that. No. Why not? Because my brother's life hung in the balance. Because I'd signed a contract in more than just ink. Because some part of me, the part I hated most, was curious what it would be like to stop being invisible. "Because you keep your promises," I said instead. "And I keep mine." He moved closer, his footsteps silent on the Persian carpet. "You're more perceptive than I anticipated. You're less obvious than most criminals." That did make him smile, brief and sharp. "Most criminals are idiots who think violence is power. Real power is subtler. It's knowing what people fear and what they desire, then positioning yourself at the intersection. And what do I desire?" The question hung between us like a dare. He studied me for a long moment, close enough now that I could see the exact shade of his eyes. Not quite blue, not quite gray, something in between like winter sky before snow. "Safety," he said finally. "Control. The sense that your actions have meaning beyond survival." He tilted his head slightly. "And maybe, just maybe, you desire to stop being overlooked, to be seen." My breath caught. He was wrong. He had to be wrong. Except he wasn't, and we both knew it. "You're trying to manipulate me." "No." His voice dropped lower. "Manipulation requires deception. I'm simply being honest. You came into my world expecting a monster, Diane, and what you found instead was someone who understands you better than the people you thought were your friends. You don't understand anything about me. Don't I?" He gestured at the books surrounding us. "You gravitate toward knowledge, toward understanding systems and patterns. You're most comfortable in the spaces between things. Networks, codes, the invisible architecture that holds the visible world together. You're brilliant at being unseen, and that's exactly what makes you perfect for what I need." Heat crawled up my neck. He was too close, his presence too consuming, and the worst part was that he wasn't threatening me. This would have been easier if he'd threatened me. "What do you need?" My voice came out smaller than I intended. "Someone I can trust." Simple, direct. Someone whose loyalty isn't bought with money, or coerced through fear, but earned through mutual understanding. "You threatened my brother." "Yes, and you came anyway." He leaned back slightly, giving me room to breathe. "That tells me everything I need to know about where your true loyalties lie. With family, with people who matter to you. I can work with that, Diane. I can respect it. I hate you." "No." His certainty was infuriating. "You hate that you don't hate me. There's a difference." The silence that followed was thick enough to drown in. He was right. God help me, he was right. I should have despised him with every fiber of my being. Should have been planning escape or revenge or anything except this strange, twisted fascination with the way his mind worked. "The locked drawer," I said, changing the subject because I needed to regain some sense of control. "In your desk. What's in it?" His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe. Or approval. Why do you want to know? Because it's the only thing in this entire mansion you've kept from me, and that makes it important. He was quiet for several heartbeats, studying me like I was a puzzle he was only beginning to understand. Then, impossibly, he smiled. Come with me. We walked back to the study in silence, the mansion around us settling into its nighttime rhythms. Guards changing shifts, doors closing softly, the creak of old wood and the whisper of expensive ventilation systems. Columbo moved behind his desk, withdrew a key from his pocket, and opened the locked drawer. He pulled out a leather journal, worn at the edges, clearly handled many times. He set it on the desk between us. My father's, he said quietly. He kept records of everything, every deal, every betrayal, every promise made and broken. He died when I was 26, and this was the only thing I took from his estate. I stared at the journal, understanding dawning slowly. This is leverage. This is history. His fingers brushed the leather cover almost reverently. Names of people who thought they were untouchable. Evidence of crimes that were supposed to stay buried. The foundation of everything I built afterward. Why are you showing me this? Because you asked. He looked at me directly, and for the first time, I saw something other than cold calculation in his expression. Something that might have been loneliness. And because I'm tired of being the only one who knows these ghosts. The vulnerability in his admission hit harder than any threat could have. He was trusting me with something that could destroy him, not because he had to, but because he chose to. I don't understand you, I whispered. I know. His voice was soft, almost tender. But you will. Given time, Diane, you'll understand me better than anyone else alive. And that's what terrifies me. He left the study then, left me standing alone with his father's journal and the weight of secrets I hadn't asked for but now carried anyway. When I finally returned to my room hours later, I lay awake listening to the mansion breathe around me. And somewhere in the darkness, I heard his footsteps in the hallway outside my door. Slow, measured, then stopping, waiting. My heartbeat matched the rhythm of his breathing through the door, and I hated that I could hear it, hated that I was listening, hated that some part of me wanted him to knock. He didn't. Eventually, the footsteps moved away, leaving only silence and the terrible certainty that something was shifting between us that neither of us knew how to control. The note appeared on the 11th morning, tucked under my coffee cup in the breakfast room. Plain paper, no envelope, folded once. You're not safe. My hand froze halfway to the cup. The handwriting was cramped, hurried, written by someone whose fingers were shaking. I glanced around the room, empty except for the guard stationed by the door. The same stone-faced man who'd been there every morning. He showed no reaction, no indication he'd seen anyone approach my table. I pocketed the note, finished my coffee, and tried to convince myself it was nothing. A test, maybe. Columbo seeing how I'd react to perceived threats. Except the handwriting bothered me. The desperation in those jagged letters. The second note came 3 days later, this time slipped between the pages of a file I was reviewing in the study. He's using you. My breath caught. The handwriting was the same, but clearer this time, more controlled. Whoever was leaving these had steadied themselves, found courage or calculation or both. I should have told Columbo. Should have brought both notes to him immediately, proven my loyalty by exposing whoever was trying to undermine it. But something stopped me. Curiosity, maybe, or the small, defiant part of my brain that insisted I needed to understand what was happening before I chose whose side I was on. The third note appeared on the 17th night, left on my pillow like a mint in a hotel. Look in the west wing, 3rd floor, room 317. Midnight. Come alone. This time, the handwriting made my world tilt sideways. I knew those letters, that particular slant of the capital L, the way the numbers curled at their base. Caleb, my brother, was here, in this mansion, close enough to leave notes on my pillow. I spent the hours until midnight making plans, discarding them, making new ones. Every scenario ended the same way, with me walking into a trap. Either my brother had somehow infiltrated Columbo's fortress and was trying to help me escape, or someone was using his handwriting to lure me into doing something catastrophically stupid. At 11:47, I left my room. The mansion at night was a different creature than during the day. Darker, despite the strategically placed lighting. Quieter, with silence that felt thick enough to choke on. I'd memorized the guard rotations, knew the blind spots in the security coverage, understood the rhythms of this place better than I'd understood anywhere I'd ever lived. The West Wing was forbidden territory. I'd been explicitly told during my first week that the rooms there were private, off-limits, not to be entered under any circumstances, which meant they contained either something illegal enough to warrant special protection, or something personal enough that Columbo wanted it hidden. Room 317 was at the end of a corridor that smelled like disuse and expensive wood polish. The door was slightly ajar, light bleeding through the gap like a promise or a threat. I pushed it open. The room beyond was small, austere. Just a bed, a desk, a single window with heavy curtains drawn against the night. And standing with his back to me, silhouetted against the window, was a figure I would have recognized anywhere. Caleb. My brother turned, and the relief that flooded through me lasted exactly 3 seconds before I saw his face. He looked terrible, thinner than I remembered, hollow-eyed, with the kind of exhaustion that lived in bone marrow rather than muscle. But it was the fear in his expression that stopped me cold. "Diane." His voice cracked. "You shouldn't have come. What are you talking about? You sent me notes telling me to come here." "No," he shook his head frantically. "I didn't. I sent one note, 2 days ago, trying to warn you. The others," he gestured helplessly. "Jesus, Di, it's a trap." The door closed behind me with a soft click that sounded like a coffin lid. "Not a trap." Columbo's voice came from the shadows to my left, where he'd been standing the entire time, perfectly still, watching us both. "A test." I spun to face him, my heart hammering. He stepped into the light, impeccably dressed as always, his expression unreadable. "You knew," I breathed. "You knew Caleb was here the whole time." "Of course I knew." He moved closer, his attention shifting between us. "Did you really think I'd lose track of a $3 million debt just because the debtor ran? I had him picked up the same night I collected you. He's been here for 17 days, Diane. 1 floor above you the entire time." The betrayal cut deeper than it should have. "You promised he'd be safe." "He is safe." I never specified where. Columbo's gaze settled on my brother, cold and assessing. "Though his safety has been contingent on your cooperation. Which brings us to tonight's little experiment." "What experiment?" But even as I asked, I understood. The notes, the escalation, the invitation to come here alone. You wanted to see if I'd betray you. I wanted to see where your loyalties actually lie. He gestured at Caleb. "Your brother, who destroyed his own life and nearly took yours with it. Or me, who offered you purpose and protection in exchange for service." His voice dropped. "Who would you choose, Diane, if forced to decide?" The question hung in the air like a blade suspended by spider silk. Caleb stared at me with desperate hope, and Columbo watched with clinical interest. And I stood between them, realizing that this moment had been inevitable from the second I'd signed that contract. "This isn't fair," I said quietly. "Nothing about life is fair." Columbo's tone remained neutral. "But it is illuminating. So choose. Walk out of this room with your brother right now. I'll give you both a car, money, a head start. Or stay. Continue your work. And your brother remains my guest for the foreseeable future." "Some guest," Caleb spat. "You mean prisoner." "I mean alive." Columbo's attention never left me, which is more than he deserves, given the circumstances. My brother made a strangled sound. "Di, please. You can't trust him. He's manipulating you. He's been doing it since the night he showed up at our apartment. This whole thing. The job. The mansion. Making you feel special. It's all calculated." "I know." The admission tasted like copper. "I'm not an idiot, Caleb. I know exactly what he's doing. Then come with me. We'll figure something out. We always do." "Do we?" I heard my voice harden. months of suppressed resentment finally breaking through. Because from where I'm standing, I've been figuring things out alone for years while you gambled away money we didn't have. So forgive me if I'm not eager to run away with you and start the whole cycle over again. Caleb flinched like I'd struck him. That's not fair. No, I agreed. But it's true. The silence that followed felt like drowning. My brother's face crumpled, and I hated myself for causing it. Hated him for making me choose. Hated Columbo for orchestrating this entire nightmare. If I stay, I said slowly, turning to face Columbo. What happens to him? He remains here. Comfortable, fed, alive. Not free, but safe. And if I go, then you both disappear, and I lose $3 million plus the cost of finding you. His expression didn't change. I don't like losing Diane. It tends to make me focused. A threat wrapped in silk. I understood perfectly. You're a bastard, I whispered. Yes, no shame in the admission, but I'm a bastard who keeps his promises. Your brother lives as long as you serve me faithfully. That was our agreement. I'm simply clarifying the terms. I looked at Caleb, saw the betrayal and hurt and desperate hope warring in his expression. My brother, the only family I had left. The person I'd been protecting and sacrificing for since our mother died. And I realized with sudden, terrible clarity that I was tired. Tired of carrying him. Tired of cleaning up his messes. Tired of setting myself on fire to keep him warm. I'm sorry, I said and meant it. But I'm staying. Caleb's face went white. Dee, you'll be safe here. Fed, sheltered, alive. I forced myself to hold his gaze. That's more than you'd be if I left with you. You know it is. He's going to destroy you. Maybe. I glanced at Columbo, saw something flicker in those winter eyes. Satisfaction? Approval? But that's my choice to make. Columbo moved to the door, opened it, gestured for me to exit. Come, Diane. Your brother needs to rest. I walked past Caleb without looking back, couldn't bear to see what I knew would be in his expression. Columbo followed, closing the door behind us with a soft click that sounded like something ending. We walked in silence back toward my wing of the mansion. At the base of the stairs, he finally spoke. That was more difficult for you than you're admitting. Everything about this is difficult. Yes. He stopped, turned to face me. But you stayed anyway. Why? Because running would have solved nothing. Because some part of me had stopped believing in escape. Because standing in that room, forced to choose between my past and my future, I'd realized my past had been drowning me for years. Because you're right, I said instead. This isn't about fairness. It's about survival. And I'm better at surviving here than I ever was out there. He studied me for a long moment, and I had the sudden, unsettling sensation that he was seeing past my words to the truth I wasn't ready to admit. That some part of me had chosen him not out of necessity, but because he understood the darkness I'd been pretending didn't exist inside me. Come, he said finally, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. I have something to show you. He led me down corridors I'd never explored, through sections of the mansion that felt older, more lived in. We stopped at a door carved with intricate patterns, and he pushed it open to reveal a room that stole my breath. It was an office, but unlike any I'd seen. Monitors lined one wall, showing surveillance feeds from across what I assumed was his entire operation. But it was the rest of the space that transfixed me. The maps, the documents, the careful organization of information that suggested this was the nerve center of everything he'd built. This is where the real work happens, he said quietly. Where decisions are made that echo across continents, and as of tonight, you have access. I stared at the monitors, understanding the weight of what he was offering. This wasn't just employment. This was trust. The kind that could get us both killed if I betrayed it. Why? My voice came out barely above a whisper. He moved closer. Close enough that I could feel the heat of him, smell the faint scent of his cologne. Because you chose me, Diane? Not your brother, not your past, not the person you thought you were supposed to be. You chose this. His breath stirred my hair. And that makes you more valuable than any amount of money. I chose survival. No. His voice dropped to something intimate, dangerous. You chose power. The difference matters. I turned to face him, found him close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his gaze. Those pale eyes held something I'd never seen there before. Not calculation or cold assessment, but heat, want. If you're going to spy on me, he murmured, at least be better at it. My breath caught. He knew about the locked drawer, about my careful observation of guard rotations, about every small rebellion I'd thought I was hiding. And instead of punishing me for it, he was, what? Amused? Intrigued? I wasn't spying. The lie was transparent, and we both knew it. Liar, but he said it almost fondly. His hand came up, fingers brushing my jaw with a gentleness that felt more dangerous than any threat. You've been cataloging my vulnerabilities since the moment you arrived. The question is what you plan to do with that information. I should have stepped back, should have put distance between us and the terrible heat building in the space we occupied. But my body had stopped obeying rational commands the moment his skin touched mine. Nothing, I whispered. I plan to do nothing. Another lie. His thumb traced the line of my cheekbone, and I felt it in my spine, in my pulse, in places I refused to acknowledge. But I appreciate the effort. He dropped his hand and stepped away, the absence of his touch leaving me cold despite the warm air. Your brother will be moved to better accommodations tomorrow. He'll have books, entertainment, anything reasonable he requests. But he doesn't leave this property. Are we clear? Crystal. Good. He moved toward the door, then paused. And Diane? The next time you want to know something about me, just ask. I prefer honesty to espionage, even when the spy is as talented as you. He left me standing in that nerve center of power, surrounded by screens showing a world I was becoming part of whether I wanted to or not. I spent an hour studying the feeds, understanding the scope of what I'd walked into. Warehouses, shipping routes, communication networks spanning continents. This wasn't just organized crime. This was an empire. When I finally returned to my room, exhausted and wrung out, I found something on my pillow that made my blood run cold. A single white rose. No note. Just the flower, perfect and pristine against the dark silk of my pillowcase. I knew without asking who had left it. And I knew what it meant. He'd been in my room. While I was exploring his secrets, he'd walked into mine. The message was clear. Nowhere was private. Nowhere was safe. And the man who held my brother's life in his hands could reach me any time he wanted. I slept that night with the rose on my nightstand, its perfume filling the darkness, and dreamed of winter eyes watching me from shadows I couldn't escape. The dress appeared 3 days later, hanging in my closet like an accusation. Emerald silk that caught light and held it, cut low enough to make a statement, expensive enough to make my teeth ache. A card was pinned to the hanger in that familiar, elegant script. Dinner tonight, 8 o'clock, don't be late. I wanted to refuse. Wanted to show up in jeans and spite just to prove I still had some control over my own choices. But I'd learned enough about Columbo's world to know that gestures mattered, that appearances were weapons, and that showing up to whatever this was in anything less than armor would be surrendering ground I couldn't afford to lose. So I put on the dress. It fit like it had been made for me. Probably had been. The silk moved like water against my skin, and when I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked dangerous, expensive, like someone who belonged in the world I'd been thrust into. The guard who came to collect me at 7:50 knocked twice and waited. Professional, distant. He led me through corridors I'd never explored, down a curved staircase that belonged in a palace, to double doors carved with scenes of Roman conquest. The dining room beyond stole whatever courage I'd managed to gather. It was massive. A table that could seat 30 stretched beneath chandeliers dripping crystal, walls lined with art that museums would wage wars to possess. But it was the people that made my breath catch. 20 guests, maybe more, all dressed in the kind of wealth that whispered instead of shouted. Men in tailored suits that cost more than cars, women in gowns that sparkled like captured starlight. And at the head of the table, Columbo rose as I entered. He wore black tonight, severe and perfect, His hair swept back to reveal the sharp architecture of his face. But it was his eyes that found mine across the room, pale and knowing and holding something that made my stomach twist. Diane. My name in his mouth sounded like possession. Come. Every conversation in the room died as I walked toward him. I felt their eyes cataloging, judging, pricing. Felt the weight of being displayed like a acquisition he was particularly proud of. The chair beside his had been left empty. Of course it had. I sat, and the conversations resumed, but softer now, more careful. A woman across from me, blonde, beautiful in the way expensive surgery could buy, smiled with teeth that could cut glass. So you're Marcello's new acquisition. How charming. The word acquisition landed like a slap. I opened my mouth to respond, but Columbo's hand found mine beneath the table. His grip was steady, warm, and absolutely unmistakable. Careful, Katerina. His voice remained pleasant, almost bored. Diane isn't an acquisition. She's the reason several people in this room are still breathing instead of feeding fish in the harbor. The silence that followed was absolute. Katerina's smile froze, then shattered. She looked away first, reaching for her wine with trembling fingers. I felt his thumb trace a circle on my palm, a small, secret gesture that no one else could see. The intimacy of it hit harder than any public claim could have. Dinner was served in courses that probably cost more than I used to make in a month. I pushed food around my plate, hyper-aware of every movement I made, every word spoken around me. These people dealt in violence and money and secrets that could topple governments. And I was sitting among them wearing a dress that marked me as belonging to the most dangerous man in the room. Halfway through the main course, a man to my left, silver-haired, with the kind of face that suggested he'd done terrible things and slept well anyway, leaned closer. Tell me, Miss Garrett, what exactly do you do for our host? The question was innocent on the surface. The implication beneath it made my skin crawl. I manage his digital security infrastructure. I kept my voice level, professional. Network integrity, data protection, communications, monitoring. Ah, he smiled. So you're the one who ensures his secrets stay buried. I'm the one who ensures his legitimate business interests remain protected from industrial espionage. Is that what we're calling it these days? His laugh was ugly. How delightfully euphemistic. Columbo's hand tightened on mine. Not painful, just present. A reminder that I wasn't alone in this den of wolves. Mr. Volkov. His tone could have frozen oceans. Perhaps you should focus on your own business interests. I understand your shipping operation in Rotterdam has been experiencing some unfortunate complications. Volkov's smile vanished. The threat was clear. Step back or be reminded exactly how much Columbo knew about everyone in this room. The rest of dinner passed in careful conversation and veiled threats disguised as small talk. I watched it all unfold with growing understanding. This wasn't a social gathering. This was theater. A performance designed to remind everyone present exactly where they stood in the hierarchy of power. And I was sitting at the right hand of the king. When dessert was cleared, and guests began filtering toward the adjoining salon for drinks, Columbo finally released my hand. I felt the absence of his touch like losing armor in battle. You handled yourself well. He stood, offered his arm with old-world formality. Better than most would have. I had good motivation not to screw up. I took his arm because refusing would have caused talk. Being disappeared into the harbor isn't high on my bucket list. His laugh was quiet, genuine. No one's disappearing you, Diane. You're far too valuable. Valuable. The word tasted bitter. Like an asset. Like someone I've chosen to protect. He guided me away from the crowd, toward a terrace that overlooked gardens bathed in moonlight. The night air was cool against my overheated skin. There's a difference. We stood at the railing, the party continuing behind us through glass doors that muted the sound to underwater murmurs. I could feel him beside me, solid and warm, and hated that part of me wanted to lean into that steadiness. My brother, I said, because I needed to break whatever was building between us. You said he'd be moved to better accommodations. He was, this afternoon, A suite in the East Wing with actual windows and books from my library. Can I see him? No. The flat refusal stung more than it should have. Why not? Because you need to understand that this life requires sacrifice, Diane. And one of those sacrifices is the constant presence of people who remind you of who you used to be. He turned to face me fully, and in the moonlight his features looked carved from marble. Your brother is safe, fed, comfortable, but if you keep running back to him, you'll never fully commit to what you've become. And what have I become? The silence stretched between us like a wire pulled too tight. Finally, he said quietly, someone who chose survival over sentiment. Someone who understands that power requires ruthlessness. You're trying to change me. No. His hand came up, and I felt his fingers ghost along my jaw the way they had in his office. I'm trying to reveal who you already are beneath the layers of guilt and obligation you've been carrying. You're not a martyr, Diane. You're a survivor. There's a difference. I wanted to argue, wanted to prove him wrong, but standing there in the moonlight wearing a dress he'd chosen, having spent the evening at his side while he casually threatened people who'd built empires on violence, I couldn't find the words to deny what was becoming terrifyingly clear. Some part of me liked this, liked feeling protected instead of vulnerable, liked being seen as valuable instead of invisible, liked the weight of his attention and the heat of his proximity and the terrible certainty that he understood me better than I understood myself. You're wrong about me, I whispered. We'll see. He stepped closer, close enough that I could feel his breath stir my hair. Your brother told you I was manipulating you. Was he right? The question hung in the cooling air like a blade. I should have said yes. Should have built walls between us and the dangerous intimacy that kept finding ways to breach my defenses. Instead, I said, does it matter? His smile was brief and devastating. Only if you want it to. We stood too close in the moonlight, silence pressing between us like heat, and I understood with dawning clarity that this, whatever this was, had stopped being about debt or obligation or survival. This was becoming something I didn't have words for, something that felt like drowning and flying in the same breath. I should go, I managed. Yes, but he didn't step back. You should. Neither of us moved. The party continued behind us, a world away, and in the space between one heartbeat and the next, I felt everything shift. He left first, breaking whatever spell had wrapped around us. I watched him walk back into the light and laughter, watched him transform back into the untouchable figure who commanded rooms with his presence. But I'd felt him hesitate, felt the moment when he almost didn't let go, and that terrified me more than any threat ever could. The file appeared on my desk 3 weeks after the dinner, innocuous among the daily reports I'd been assigned to review. Just another encrypted communication log, another thread in the vast web of information I'd been learning to manage. But something about the routing signature made my stomach twist. I knew that signature, had seen it 100 times on the monitors in our old apartment, glowing in the blue light of Caleb's screens. My hands shook as I ran the decryption protocols, already knowing what I'd find but needing to see it anyway, needing the confirmation that would shatter whatever fragile hope I'd been clinging to. The data bloomed across my screen like poison flowers, communication logs spanning months, financial transactions routed through cryptocurrency wallets I recognized, and attached to every single transfer, a code name that made my blood run cold. Ghost. C. Caleb had been selling information. Not just any information, Colombo's information. Security protocols, shipment routes, names of contacts in 12 different countries. Everything I'd been protecting, my brother had been systematically betraying. For 3 months while I worked to keep him safe, he'd been working with people who wanted Colombo dead. The timestamps were damning. Some of the leaks had occurred while I was at dinner parties, while I was learning to navigate this world, while I was beginning to believe that maybe, somehow, this could work. And all along, my brother had been in that comfortable suite with its books and windows, using the access I'd fought for to destroy everything I'd sacrificed to protect. I sat there for 20 minutes, staring at the evidence, feeling something cold and final settle in my chest. Then I gathered the files and walked to Colombo's office. He was standing at the window when I entered, silhouetted against the afternoon light. He turned, took one look at my face, and went still. "Show me," he said quietly. I handed him the tablet without a word. Watched his expression remain perfectly controlled as he scrolled through the evidence. Only his eyes betrayed him. They went from pale blue to something closer to winter ice, the kind of cold that killed without mercy. "How long have you known?" His voice was soft, dangerously soft. 15 minutes. I came straight here." He studied me for a long moment, and I had the terrible sense that he was measuring something I couldn't see, testing the weight of my loyalty against the weight of my blood. "Your brother has been communicating with the Volkov organization," he said finally. "The same people who tried to humiliate you at dinner. They've been planning a move against my operations for months, and he's been their inside source." The words landed like physical blows. Volkov, the man with the ugly smile who'd called me an acquisition. My brother had been working with him. "Where is Caleb now?" My voice came out steadier than I felt. "In his room. He doesn't know we've discovered the breach yet." Columbo set the tablet down, leaned against his desk. "Which gives us options." Options. The word tasted like ash. I could kill him. It would be justified. Expected even. A traitor in my own house. That kind of disrespect requires a response that sends a message. He paused, watching my reaction. "Or I could use him. Feed false information through his channels. Turn his betrayal into a weapon against Volkov. Or I could let him go. Put him on a plane tonight. Send him somewhere he can't hurt us, and never speak of him again." His eyes held mine. "But that option requires something from you." My throat closed. "What?" "The truth. Right now." "Is this the first you've known about his activities?" "Yes." The word came out fierce, certain. "I swear to you, I had no idea. And if I let him live, will you try to maintain contact? Try to protect him further?" The question cut deeper than any blade, because I knew the answer he wanted, knew what I had to say to keep us both alive. But more than that, I knew it was the truth. No. The admission felt like something dying inside me. He made his choice. I'm done paying for his mistakes. Something shifted in Columbo's expression. Not softness, exactly, but a kind of grim satisfaction. "Blood is a debt too," he said softly. "You can only pay it once. What are you going to do?" He moved to the window, hands clasped behind his back. For a long moment he said nothing, and I watched the light play across his shoulders, highlighting the tension there. "I'm going to give you his location," he said finally. "And you're going to tell me whether to send him away or bring him down here to answer for what he's done. Your choice, Diane. Your brother's life in your hands." The weight of it nearly drove me to my knees. This was the test, the final measure of where my loyalties truly lay. Choose Caleb, and I'd be choosing someone who'd betrayed not just Columbo, but me. Every hour I'd worked, every sacrifice I'd made. My brother had spat on all of it. Choose Columbo, and I'd be choosing a man who'd manipulated me from the start, who'd orchestrated my captivity and called it employment, who held power over life and death with the casual ease of someone deciding what to have for breakfast. But Columbo had kept his promises, had given me purpose when I'd been drowning in my brother's debris, had looked at me and seen something worth cultivating instead of something to be used and discarded. And Caleb? Caleb had sold me out while I fought to keep him alive. "East Wing," I whispered. "Suite 412. My hands shook as I said it. The words felt like murder on my tongue. Columbo nodded once, then spoke quietly into his phone. Orders given in Italian, too fast for me to follow. When he ended the call, he turned back to me. "You chose wisely." "Did I?" My voice cracked. "Because I feel like I just killed my own brother. He's not dead. Yet." He moved closer, and I forced myself not to retreat from the intensity in his gaze. "But he's gone from here. From your life. From my organization. Whether he survives what comes next depends entirely on his own choices." "What does that mean?" "It means I'm giving him a chance your loyalty doesn't deserve. He'll be on a plane in 2 hours, sent somewhere with enough money to start over if he's smart. But if I ever see evidence he's spoken to anyone about what he learned here, if his name appears in connection with any of my enemies, He didn't finish. Didn't need to. The tears came without permission. Hot and shameful. I'd just traded my brother's presence for his survival, and the guilt was a living thing clawing at my chest. Columbo's hand found my face, tilting my chin up with surprising gentleness. You made the right choice. Then why does it feel like I'm dying? Because you still have a conscience. His thumb brushed away a tear, the gesture so at odds with the ruthlessness in his words. That's good. It means you're not lost yet. Not yet, I repeated bitterly. He studied my face for a long moment, something unreadable moving behind those winter eyes. Then he pulled me against his chest, one arm wrapping around my shoulders in an embrace that felt more like shelter than possession. He would have gotten you killed, Diane. Him and his recklessness and his inability to think beyond his next desperate gamble. You know that. I did know, had known it for years. But knowing and accepting were different countries, separated by an ocean of guilt. I let myself lean into him for exactly 30 seconds, borrowing his steadiness, his certainty. Then I pulled away, wiped my face, and forced my spine straight. I want to see the evidence destroyed, I said. The files. All of it. I don't want any record of what he did. That's not how this works. Make it work. I met his gaze and held it. You said I chose wisely. Then let me choose this too. My brother gets his chance, but his betrayal dies here. No loose ends that could come back later. A slow smile curved his mouth. You're learning. I had a good teacher. He moved back to his desk, made another call. More Italian, this time laced with something that might have been amusement. When he hung up, he nodded. Done. The files are being purged now. As far as anyone will know, we caught the leak before any real damage occurred. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. His expression turned serious. This doesn't mean you're free of him. Blood doesn't wash away that easily. There will be nights when you wonder if you made the right choice. When the guilt will try to convince you I'm the villain in this story. Aren't you? Perhaps. He tilted his head, studying me. But so are you, now. We're both covered in the same shade of gray. 2 hours later, I stood at a window overlooking the front drive and watched a black car disappear down the long road toward the gates. Caleb was inside, alive but gone, and I felt the absence like a phantom limb. Columbo appeared beside me, silent as always. We stood together as the taillights faded into darkness. Regrets? He asked quietly. Too many to count. But not about this. It wasn't a question. And he was right. Underneath the guilt and grief was something harder, colder. Relief. The exhausting weight of my brother's dysfunction had been cut away, and I could finally breathe. No, I admitted. Not about this. His hand found mine in the darkness, fingers threading through my own with deliberate intent. Not demanding, not claiming, simply there, solid and certain, and I held on, because I had nothing left to lose. The attack came at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, shattering the mansion's false peace like a hammer through glass. I woke to the sound of windows exploding somewhere below, the sharp crack of gunfire puncturing the night. Alarms screamed through the corridors, joined by shouts in multiple languages as Columbo's guards mobilized. My training kicked in before conscious thought. I rolled out of bed, grabbed the phone he'd given me, and moved to the corner furthest from the window. The phone had one number programmed. It rang twice. Stay in your room. His voice was clipped, controlled, but I could hear violence in the background. Lock the door. Stay away from windows. The line went dead. More gunfire, closer now. The distinct percussion of automatic weapons answered by the heavier boom of shotguns. I heard men running in the corridor outside, shouting coordinates, tactical positions, the kind of organized chaos that spoke of rehearsed emergency protocols. But something was wrong. The gunfire wasn't moving away. It was moving up, toward my floor. The door to my room exploded inward. A man filled the doorway, masked and armed, weapon tracking across the space with professional efficiency. He found me in the corner, and I watched his finger tighten on the trigger with the strange, crystalline clarity that comes when death is close enough to touch. Then Columbo was there, materializing from the smoke-filled corridor like something carved from violence itself. He moved with liquid speed, closing the distance before the masked man could fully turn. I saw the flash of a blade, heard the wet sound of steel finding flesh, watched the gunman crumple, but not before he fired. The muzzle flash illuminated Columbo's face for a split second, all sharp focus and cold fury. Then he staggered, one hand going to his side, blood already spreading across the white shirt he wore beneath his tactical vest. "No!" The word ripped from my throat as I lunged forward, catching him as his legs buckled. His weight drove us both to the floor, and I felt hot blood soaking through my nightshirt, slicking my hands as I tried to find the wound. "Diane," his voice was tight with pain. "You need to go." "Shut up." My hands were shaking, pressing against the hole in his side, trying to stop the bleeding that kept coming, warm and terrifying. "Just shut up and don't move." More gunfire erupted below us, accompanied by the distinctive whump of something explosive detonating. The mansion shuddered, and I heard glass raining down somewhere distant. Columbo's hand found my wrist, grip still strong despite the blood loss. "The safe room, behind the bookshelf in my office. Code is..." He coughed, and blood flecked his lips. "Your birthday. I'm not leaving you." "You are." His eyes, those winter eyes that had evaluated me so coldly our first night, held something I'd never seen there before. Fear, not for himself, for me. "They came for you, Diane. This whole attack, it's about you." The words hit like another gunshot. "What?" "Volkov knows your brother talked, knows you gave him up." His breathing was getting shallower, each word harder. "This is revenge." Guilt and terror warred in my chest. This was my fault. My choice to betray Caleb had brought armed men into this house, had put a bullet in. "Stop." Columbo's hand tightened on my wrist. "I can hear you thinking. This isn't your fault. It's mine for letting him live long enough to..." Another cough, more blood. "Go, now. Not without you." I didn't recognize my own voice. It came out fierce, almost feral. The idea of leaving him here to die while I hid felt like something fundamental breaking inside me. His lips curved slightly despite the pain. "Stubborn. You made me this way." I hooked my arms under his shoulders and pulled. He was heavy, solid muscle and dead weight, and I felt something in my back protest as I dragged him across the floor. The corridor beyond my room was chaos. Smoke thick enough to choke on, the smell of cordite and blood. Bodies on the floor in various states of injury. I didn't look at their faces, couldn't afford to. Columbo's office was 20 feet away. 20 feet through hell. I pulled him inch by agonizing inch, his blood leaving a trail behind us like breadcrumbs for anyone hunting us. My arms screamed, my lungs burned with smoke, and somewhere distant I could hear more windows shattering as the attack continued. His hand caught my wrist again, trying to stop me. "Diane, don't you dare die," I gasped, not sure if I was speaking to him or to whatever deity might be listening. "Not like this, not before I..." I couldn't finish. Didn't have words for what was clawing its way up my throat. Terror and rage, and something that felt dangerously close to grief for a man who was still breathing. We reached his office. The bookshelf was where he said it would be, and my fingers found the concealed latch through muscle memory from all those hours I'd spent cataloging his secrets. It swung open to reveal a reinforced door with a keypad. My birthday. He'd made it my birthday. My hands were so slick with his blood I had to wipe them on my nightshirt before I could enter the numbers. The door clicked open with a sound that felt like salvation. The safe room beyond was small, windowless, lined with communications, equipment, and weapons I barely recognized. I pulled Columbo inside, let the door seal behind us with a hydraulic hiss that muted the chaos outside. In the sudden quiet, his breathing sounded horribly loud and wet. "Medical supplies." He gestured weakly toward a cabinet. "Second shelf." I found bandages, antiseptic, trauma pads designed for exactly this scenario. My hands steadied as I worked, some distant part of my brain taking over. Press the wound. Apply pressure. Pack it tight. His blood was everywhere. On me. On the floor. staining the white trauma pads crimson as fast as I could apply them. "You're not dying tonight," I whispered, pressing my forehead to his shoulder, breathing in the scent of him beneath the copper smell of blood. "You don't get to die. Not yet. Not." His hand found my hair, fingers threading through the tangles with surprising gentleness. "I'm not going anywhere. Promise me." "I promise." The words felt like a vow, like something binding and permanent. I lifted my head to meet his gaze and found him watching me with an expression that made my breath catch. "You'd miss me," he murmured. And despite everything, the blood, the pain, the chaos still raging beyond these walls, there was something almost tender in his voice. "Don't sound so surprised." His laugh turned into a cough, but his eyes never left mine. "I'm always surprised by you." Outside the safe room, the sounds of fighting began to fade. Fewer gunshots, less shouting. Either Columbo's men were winning, or we were about to have much bigger problems. I stayed pressed against him, my hands maintaining pressure on the wound, his blood warm between my fingers. And somewhere in that small space, surrounded by weapons and blood and the smell of smoke seeping through the seals, I realized something that should have terrified me. I didn't just want to survive anymore. I wanted him to survive too. The door's communication panel blinked green, the all-clear signal. But I didn't move, couldn't bring myself to release him yet. "Diane." His voice was getting stronger, the bleeding finally slowing. "We're safe now." "I know." But I still didn't let go. And he didn't ask me to. Outside, flames reflected in the windows visible through the office door's small viewing panel, painting everything in shades of orange and red. The mansion was burning, my old life was ashes, and I was kneeling in a dead man's blood, whispering his name like a prayer, and I wasn't afraid anymore. Recovery was slower than Columbo wanted, and faster than medical logic suggested. The bullet had missed major organs by millimeters. Luck or divine intervention, depending on who you asked. 3 days after the attack, he was confined to his room, restless and increasingly difficult, arguing with doctors who insisted on bed rest. I stayed close. Not because he asked. He was too proud for that. But because leaving felt impossible. I'd pulled him from death's door, and some irrational part of me believed my presence was the only thing keeping him tethered to life. The mansion around us bore scars from the attack, boarded windows, scorch marks on marble floors, the lingering smell of smoke no amount of cleaning could quite erase. 6 of Columbo's men had died defending the compound. Another 8 were injured, and Volkov, the man who'd orchestrated it all, had been found 3 days later in his hotel room, dead from what the police would call a heart attack. I knew better, knew the kind of heart attack that left no evidence but stopped breathing just the same. On the 4th afternoon, I brought food to Columbo's room and found him standing at the window despite doctor's orders. His shirt was off, bandages stark white against the olive tone of his skin, and I could see the tension in his shoulders that spoke of pain he refused to acknowledge. "You're supposed to be in bed. I'm supposed to be running my empire." He didn't turn. Instead, I'm trapped here like a prisoner, while lesser men make decisions that should be mine. I set the tray down, moved to his side. "The doctor said another week of rest, or you risk tearing the stitches." "The doctors can." He stopped, exhaled slowly. When he spoke again, his voice was calmer. "I'm not good at being weak, Diane." "You're not weak. You took a bullet for me. That's the opposite of weak." Finally he turned, and his eyes found mine with that familiar intensity. "You think I wouldn't have?" "I think you didn't have to." "Yes, I did." He moved closer, wincing slightly despite trying to hide it. "From the moment I saw the gunman in your doorway, there was never another choice." The confession hung between us, weighted with implications I wasn't ready to examine. I busied myself checking his bandages, giving my hand something to do that wasn't reaching for him. "Why?" I asked quietly. "Why what? Why come for me at all? You had guards, protocols, safe rooms. You could have let them handle it." His hand caught my wrist, stopping my fidgeting with the bandages. "You know why. Humor me." The silence stretched until I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, So quietly I almost missed it, because you weren't afraid to look me in the eye. I lifted my gaze, found him watching me with an expression that was part hunger, part something softer I didn't have a name for. That first night in your apartment, he continued, when I told you about your brother's debt, you didn't beg, didn't cry. You looked at me like you were measuring whether I was worth being afraid of, and you decided I wasn't. Do you know how rare that is? Most people are smarter than me. His laugh was brief and warm. Most people are afraid of dying. You seemed more afraid of being invisible. He pulled me closer, until I could feel his body heat, until the space between us was measured in breath instead of distance. I chose you because I recognized something in you that I've spent my entire life hiding. What? The understanding that power matters more than morality, that survival requires ruthlessness, that the world is built by people willing to do what others won't. His free hand came up, fingers ghosting along my jaw. I wanted to see if you could be molded or if you'd break. And? You didn't break. You bent. You adapted. You became exactly what I knew you could be. The words should have made me angry, should have felt like manipulation, like proof that everything he'd said about mutual understanding was a lie constructed to keep me compliant. But standing there with his blood still under my fingernails, with the memory of his weight in my arms as I dragged him to safety, I couldn't summon the outrage I knew I should feel. You manipulated me, I said, testing the words. Yes, no shame in the admission. From the moment I decided to collect your brother's debt personally instead of sending my men, I knew who you were, had known for 6 months before that night. My breath caught. What? Your brother wasn't the target, Diane. He was the excuse. Columbo's thumb traced my cheekbone with devastating gentleness. I'd been watching you, your work, your skills, the way you moved through networks like a ghost. I needed someone like you. And when your brother's debt gave me an opening, I took it. The whole thing was a setup. Not a question, a statement of terrible understanding. The debt was real. Your brother's stupidity was real. But my decision to collect personally, to offer you employment instead of simpler solutions, that was calculated. You wanted to own me. No, his certainty was absolute. I wanted to understand you. There's a difference. Is there? He pulled me against his chest, carefully, mindful of his injury, and I felt his heart beating steady and strong beneath the bandages. Owning you would have been easy, Diane. I could have bought your compliance with threats and fear. But understanding you, learning what makes you brilliant and broken in equal measure, that required time, patience, the willingness to let you make choices, even when those choices might hurt. I thought of choosing him over Caleb, of the weight of that decision and the way he'd given me the power to make it. You knew I'd choose you. I hoped you would. His lips brushed my hair. But I couldn't be certain. That's what made it real. We stood like that, wrapped together in his damaged room in his damaged house. And I felt something fundamental shifting in my chest. All the anger and resentment I'd been nurturing, using as shields to protect myself from the terrible intimacy he offered, crumbled under the weight of his honesty. He'd manipulated me, used me, orchestrated my captivity, and called it choice. But he'd also kept every promise, had given me purpose when I was drowning, had taken a bullet meant for me without hesitation, and now he was offering me the most dangerous thing of all. The truth. I should hate you, I whispered against his chest. Yes, you should. I should walk away. Take the freedom you offered and never look back. You absolutely should. I lifted my head, met his gaze. So why don't I? His smile was brief and devastating. Because you're done lying to yourself about what you want. He kissed me then. Not demanding, not claiming, but asking a question I didn't have words for. His mouth was warm against mine, tasting of copper and coffee and something that felt dangerously like surrender. I kissed him back, my hands finding the unmarred skin of his back, feeling the solid reality of him beneath my palms. He was alive. We were both alive. And everything else, the manipulation, the moral compromises, the blood we both had on our hands, felt distant and abstract compared to the heat building between us. When we finally pulled apart, We were both breathing hard. "If I stay," I began. "You're staying, not a question, a certainty." "You don't know that." "Yes, I do." His forehead pressed against mine. "You stopped running the moment you pulled me out of that hallway. You just hadn't admitted it yet." He was right. God help me, he was right. I'd stopped running. Stopped counting exits and planning escapes. Somewhere between signing that contract and watching his blood stain my hands, I'd made a choice that had nothing to do with survival and everything to do with surrender. Not to him, to myself, to the part of me that had always understood power matters more than virtue, that adaptation is survival, that the woman I'd pretended to be had been a lie long before he'd offered me an alternative. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now?" He guided me toward the bed, moving carefully. "Now you stop trying to fix my bandages and let me hold you for 5 minutes without analyzing what it means. I don't think you should be." "Diane." My name in his mouth sounded like a command and a plea. 5 minutes. I let him pull me down beside him, careful of his injury, hyper-aware of every point where our bodies touched. His arm wrapped around my shoulders, and I felt myself relax against him despite every logical reason I shouldn't. The lights from the gardens filtered through his windows, casting shadows that moved like living things. Outside, guards walked their routes. Inside, we breathed together, and for 5 perfect minutes, nothing else mattered. Then his phone rang. Business never stopped, and the spell broke. But when I moved to leave, his hand caught mine. "Stay," he said quietly. "Not as my employee or my captive. Just stay." I stayed. 6 weeks after the attack, I stood on the mansion's eastern balcony watching dawn break over gardens that had been replanted, window frames that gleamed with new glass, a world rebuilt from ash and violence. The envelope arrived at breakfast, delivered by one of the household staff with the same formality as any other correspondence. But I recognized the weight of it immediately, felt it in my hands like holding potential energy. I didn't open it until I was alone on the balcony, coffee cooling beside me, morning light turning the gardens gold. Inside was a single document, legal, formal, bearing multiple signatures and official seals. A release, complete, unconditional freedom, no obligations, no strings, just 72 hours to arrange my departure and a bank account number with enough money to start anywhere in the world. Columbo's signature was at the bottom, bold and certain. I read it 3 times, waiting for the relief that should have come. The joy of escape, the promise of a life rebuilt on my own terms. Instead, I felt hollow, empty. "You can go," his voice said behind me. "No one will stop you." I didn't turn. Didn't trust my face not to betray what I couldn't yet name. "Why now?" "Because I promised you had a choice, Diane. And promises matter." He moved beside me, close but not touching. "The attack proved my world is dangerous. Staying here means accepting that danger as permanent. You deserve the chance to walk away." "What if I don't want to walk away?" The silence that followed felt infinite. "Finally," he said, "then I need to know why." I looked at him then, at the man who'd destroyed my life and rebuilt it in shapes I hadn't known were possible. The scar from his gunshot wound was visible at his collar, thin and pink. Proof that survival came with marks. "Freedom means nothing if it's empty," I said slowly, testing the words. "And I'm done running. Diane, I know what you did." I cut him off, needing to say this before courage failed. "I know you manipulated me, used my brother's debt as an excuse, orchestrated everything from the moment you walked through my door. I know all of it." "Yes, and I'm staying anyway. Not because I have to. Not because I'm afraid of what happens if I leave." I took the envelope and let it fall, watched the wind catch it and carry it away over the gardens. But because this, whatever this is, it's the first thing in my life that's felt real in years. His hand found mine, fingers threading through my own with the same deliberate intent as that night after dinner. Not claiming, not demanding, simply there. "You understand what you're choosing," he said quietly. "Not rescue, not escape, but complicity in everything I am and everything I do." I understand. There's no going back from this, Diane. The moment you commit. I committed when I dragged you out of that hallway with your blood on my hands. I turned to face him fully. I committed when I chose you over my brother. When I stayed despite having every reason to run. I've been committed for weeks. I was just too stubborn to admit it. Something shifted in his expression. The control cracking enough to show what lived beneath. Relief. Want. Something that looked dangerously close to joy. Then stay, he whispered, both hands framing my face now. Stay, and don't ever look away again. I won't. The promise felt like breathing. I'm done looking away from what I am. From what we are. He kissed me as the sun broke over the gardens, warm and certain and tasting of dawn and coffee and choices made in full light instead of shadow. And I kissed him back with everything I'd been holding inside. The fear and the fury and the terrible relief of finally surrendering to what I'd known since that first night. I wasn't a victim. Wasn't a martyr or a survivor or any of the identities I'd worn like armor. I was something darker. Something that understood power mattered more than innocence. That survival required ruthlessness. That the world was built by people willing to do what others wouldn't. I was his equal in all the ways that mattered. When we finally pulled apart, the gardens below were fully lit. The world awake and continuing despite our choices. No regrets? He asked. Ask me in 50 years. His laugh was warm and genuine. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting. We stood together as the day began. His arm around my shoulders, my head resting against the solid warmth of him. Below us, guards walked their routes. Gardeners tended to replanted beds. Life continued with the relentless momentum it always had. But I wasn't the same woman who'd opened her apartment door to a dangerous stranger 2 months ago. That woman had been drowning in someone else's failures, invisible in her own life, afraid of wanting anything beyond basic survival. This woman knew the taste of power, had pulled a dying man from violence and refused to let him go, had chosen ruthlessness over sentiment and found freedom in the acknowledgement of what she'd always been beneath the performance of normalcy. He came for my brother's debt. He stayed for my soul. And somewhere between the danger and the dawn, I stopped being afraid of the dark, because I became it. The story ends not with rescue or escape, but with recognition. Two people who found in each other the darkness they'd been hiding from the world. Not a fairy tale, not redemption, just the truth that sometimes love isn't light conquering shadow. Sometimes it's two shadows learning to exist in the same dark, and that can be enough. Thank you for watching. If this story pulled you in, if you felt every heartbeat, every choice, every silence, tap that like button and let me know in the comments what moment hit you the hardest. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because more stories like this are coming darker, deeper, and even harder to walk away from. Tell me, if you were Diane, would you have stayed or walked away?